Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to the Global Pan-African People's Intervention on the U.S. African Leaders Summit. This People's Intervention is one opportunity to clarify the real relations between the U.S. government and African peoples. The topic for this panel this morning is militarism. We're going to be historicizing U.S. foreign policy and discussing how current U.S. militarism, conducting police trainings, and supporting other repressive forces continues to perpetuate European and North American imperialism and resource extraction in Africa. It props up repressive neo-colonial states and produces violence, killing, and death of African people everywhere. We hope that from this conversation, we can later develop a resolution regarding the issue of militarism in the current U.S. strategy for Africa. Our presenters for this panel this morning are Professor Justice Willy Mutunga, who will be joining us from online, Essam Elkorghli, a scholar in Libya, Maurice Carney, and Netfa Freeman. And I'm going to just briefly introduce them before they launch into their talks. We request that you hold your comments until the end of the panelist presentations. Each of them will have about 12 minutes to talk, and then we will take questions at the end. I am Zophia. I'm with the Global Pan-African Movement North America, and I'm chairing the session. So our first panelist, Professor Justice Willy Mutunga, served as Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court, the Republic of Kenya, from 2011 to 2016. He is Adjunct Professor of Public Law at the Kabarak Law School in Kenya. Essam Elkorghli is a Libyan PhD student at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the Department of Educational Policy, Organization, and Leadership. He researches Libya's modern history, state ideology, and education. Maurice Carney is co-founder and executive director of the Friends of Congo. He has served as interim Africa Working Group coordinator while he was special envoy to Africa, and has provided analyses of Congo for Al Jazeera, All Africa, Democracy Now!, and a host of other media outlets. And Netfa Freeman is started at the Institute for Policy Studies as director of their Social Action and Leadership School for Activists from 2000 to 2010. He's currently the events coordinator for other IPS projects. He's also an organizer in the Pan-African Community Action organization in DC here, a grassroots group of African and Black people organizing for community-based power, and serves on the coordinating committee of Black Alliance for Genocide. So thank you, welcome, and we look forward to the conversation. We will go in order of the program. And so Professor Justice Willy Mutunga will start us off.
Good morning, comrades. It's 6 p.m. here in Zanzibar. I've just come from the site for the slave market in Zanzibar town and seeing the Anglican church where the auctions took place. It's a town that reminds one of its occupation by the Portuguese, the Oman Arabs, and finally the British imperialists. I wanted to comment on how our
Professor Mutunga, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. So shall I continue, or you want me to start all over again?
I apologies. Could you start all over again?
Okay, yes, I'll do that. Good morning, comrades. It's 6 p.m. Well, 6:30 p.m. here in Zanzibar.
Sorry, Professor Mutunga, do you have video, or because we can't see you or anything? Is that?
Yeah, I tried the video and it wasn't working. So it was interfering with the audio. So I thought I would just
Speak.
Just speak, yes.
Thank
Because
you,
the Wi-Fi is weak here in the hotels. That's why I haven't put on the video, right?
Thank you. Please speak.
Yeah, so I was saying that I've just come from the site for the slave market in Zanzibar town, and also seen the Anglican church where the auctions took place, and the town itself reminds one of its occupation by the Portuguese, the Oman Arabs, and finally the British imperialists. Now, I was asked to comment on how our the constitution, progressive and transformative constitution, has become a site for struggles for its implementation. And that constitution, in this constitution, we are using it to demand robust public participation in our foreign policy, in our trade pacts, investment agreements, agreements on the use of military facilities, and reparations for colonialism. Now, our constitution and Article 1 decrees that sovereign power is vested in the Kenyan people, and they can exercise it directly, where the executive, for example, is not transparent and accountable. And the Kenyan people can delegate to the arms of state organs and state institutions that sovereign power. They can also withdraw that delegated sovereign power. So the judiciary has become a site for these struggles, you know, what we call in Kenya public interest litigation, you know, has become an ideal constitutional tool, you know, for these struggles. And I wanted to just touch on some examples that pertain to the relationship between Kenya and the US. In United States, Kenya strategic trade and investment partnership, which is called STIP, we are demanding from the state to have a team of experts to negotiate with the Americans as part of the participation of the Kenyan people. Now, it is the United States, or this STIP was launched on 14 July 2022. According to the Office of the United States Trade Representative under docket number USTR-2022-0008, this is what I've read. Under this initiative, the two governments will pursue enhanced engagement, leading to high standard commitments in a wide range of areas with a view to increasing investment, promoting sustainable and inclusive economic growth, benefiting workers, consumers, and businesses, including micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and supporting African regional economic integration. As the two governments develop a roadmap for the initial issues under the engagement, the Office of the United States Trade Representative is seeking public comments on matters relevant to the specified trade areas, including US interests and priorities, in order to develop objectives and positions for enhanced engagement and subsequent negotiation. The US government subsequently outlined 12 points of negotiations that will be engaged in with the Kenyan government. And these points include agriculture, anti-corruption, digital trade, environment and climate change action, good regulatory practices, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, promoting workers' rights and protections, supporting the participation of women, youth, and others in trade. Now, if you are following the comment line open by the US Department of Trade, I want to draw your attention to one comment. The US-Kenya STIP agenda includes several policy domains in which Kenya would be required to make concessions from the developmental perspective, particularly so if these negotiations are influenced by corporate interests that seek to lock in limits on public interest policies and impose hands-off approach to regulating the digital economy. For instance, in contrast to the United States, Kenya already has enacted privacy and data security policies that would be undermined if a prospective STIP includes the sorts of free flow of the data guarantees big tech demands and has obtained in some past pacts. Others are querying whether this STIP is another push of big tech to tap into cognitive skills of young Kenyans to use them as cheap labor for artificial intelligence sector of the US economy. All of us know how difficult it is to bargain with the US government. The US government has superior bargaining power, but this is no reason to surrender to its power without resistance. And our constitution decrees we bargain in the national interest, however powerful our partners are. The constitution also decrees participation of the people in transparency and accountability. And needless to say, Kenya has brilliant economists, trade experts, lawyers, political scientists, and entrepreneurs that can give us a powerful engine to negotiate in the interests of the country. And there are some considerations that if we had such a team and we're demanding it, that can take into account in the national interests. One, bilateral trade between Kenya and the USA is not as significant as the trade between Kenya and the members of the East African community. Indeed, Kenya trade with the US is estimated as US dollars 321 million, while Kenya's trade with Uganda alone is US 300 million. Now, will STIP undermine the trade and economic interests of Kenya and East Africa? Will the US interest in STIP be antithetical to the goals of economic integration in Africa as outlined in the objectives of the East African Community and African Continental Free Trade Area? Is STIP not a slight modification of the free trade agreement negotiations between the Trump administration and the Kenyatta government that started in 2019? What have we learned from the Africa Growth and Opportunity AGOA process? Will this STIP reset qualitatively what is being traded, or is it simply to export more cut flowers to the US? Will STIP provide for the investments required to strengthen the Kenyan entrepreneurs who want to invest in DRC to manufacture electric vehicle batteries? The Kenyan government should, from the outset of the negotiations, be clear whether tariffs are on the table in the negotiations. Is it not true that the military relations between the US and Africa are the primary focus of the US foreign policy in Africa? Does Kenya support the new US strategy towards Africa, that is speaking of the so-called Sub-Saharan Africa? Will STIP be a sidebar to get AFRICOM accepted by Kenya and East Africans? Will our experts be able to lobby Congress about our national interests in STIP negotiations before any law is passed? Now, all these issues now are being taken up in what I've called public interest litigation, along besides STIP, with the issues of GMOs, the other investments like the Chinese ones, so the standard gauge railway, these agreements have been made public, and the debates continue about the authenticity of the agreements made accessible to us. And Article 35 of the Constitution, we can demand access to information of state dealings. Now, there is also the issue that is in the courts, and that's the issue of reparations. And here we clearly argue that the British stole our land, and through the independence constitution imposed a willing buyer, willing seller principles to betray the Mau Mau War of Independence that fought for our stolen lands, resources, and our freedom. And given the fact that it is not constitutionally possible, for these ancestral lands to be returned to the communities themselves have turned to public interest litigation out of jurisdiction of Kenya courts and within the Kenyan courts themselves. The Kipsigis and Atalai communities have filed petitions in the European Court of Human Rights for reparations. The Mau Mau veterans sought reparations for torture and got, nominal damages. There are suits being filed, in the UK and Scotland against the British multinationals that are, violating constitutional provisions on slavery and servitude. Now, I give these examples just to emphasize that we come to an era of, global solidarities. I think Krista talked a lot about these solidarities among Africans and African descendants, wherever they are, in fighting for reparations and fighting for our resources, our land. We realize, in the case of Kenya, that unless we invoke our constitution, these investment contracts, trade pacts, etc., will go the usual route of, corruption, where our leaders don't represent national interests at all. And that's why, as I started saying, we are using our constitution as a site, for these struggles. And that's it. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Justice Mutunga. We'll move on now to
Can the people online hear me? That's the question.
I think so. I don't think they can chat.
Can the people online hear me? If you can type in the chat or in the webinar or,
How about a thumbs up?
okay, wonderful.
Okay. I mean, if you want to see, the shot can also see you speaking and that screen. If you want to do that, or you want to just.
I'll stand here. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you're joining us. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, also Professor Willy, for what is very meaningful intervention. I will be briefly speaking about Libya and US imperialism, which is very long history. Depends on the Libya that you speak to, they will say a different story. But I am centering the concept of imperialism, which I will also spend some time defining. And that's also important because a lot of people are mentioning it as a concept related to empires of 100 years ago, not a contemporary issue. Pedagogically, I always do this overview. I'm not going to talk about the past 70 years, but highlight again the intersection of Libya's foreign relations and how it's being contested with the US and vice versa. From the independence, the confrontation of 1969 to 1999, a multiple world order moment that was possible, but that didn't, come to fruition, and then the current state of neo-colonialism that Libya exists in. I put this painting of USS Philadelphia, which is a ship from 1799, when the US ships, they're starting doing their expeditions, they call them, and they would destroy the Olympic shore. The people in the Marines today, they sing every time they're singing their hymn from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, and they're filling deposits, Tripoli, not Tripoli, the Tripoli in Libya. And this is enshrining the political history of the United States in their imperialism. And so they will always remember what they have done and what has happened to them. And we should also be doing the same. When Libya received its independence in 1951, and I say received as opposed to fought for it, it was granted to it by Britain. And when it was done, when that was done, foreign military bases existed in Libya. So when the Arab-Israeli War, the Suez Canal War happened, and then the other war that happened in 1967 against the Zionists, military bases in Libya were used to kill Arabs. And so Salah Abdullah, the Pan-Arab Egyptian leader, said, we hope that Libya increases national wealth because Britain is renting Libyan spaces. But we also wish for Libya that it removes foreign military bases. So this was the question of national sovereignty. Our land is being used for foreign interests to offset what we want to actually achieve through our national project of sovereignty and liberation. When the regime change happened in 1969 with the revolutionary command, the first thing that happened were the removal of US British bases, the nationalization of oil, which commemorated that early 5 days ago, and then also the massive contribution to the Israeli-Arab War, where the Zionists were defeated in 1973. That was kind of our national project, but it wasn't confined to the Arab region only, it was also extending elsewhere. So this is the Foreign Relations Committee at the Congress. They're writing about the current foreign relations back in the 70s, so 1976. With a fanatical zeal, considerable political skill, and $70 billion yearly oil revenues, Gaddafi pursues the goal of Arab unity in a radicalized Arab world, both as an end in itself and as a necessary precondition for the destruction of the Israeli state. In addition, as a good Nasserist and a third worlder, he has given high priority to extending Tripoli's influence in Africa, propagating the Islamic faith and promoting revolutionary programs and regimes among the countries. So it was not an Arab country acting for the benefits of Arabs, but it was also a liberation project that is a collective. So South-South relations, essentially. And that was also extended to Europe. where eventually Libya was framed as a terrorist state because it was supporting the Sandinista movement in Nicaragua. It was supporting the IRA in Ireland. And if you walk in Ireland today, you'll see something like this in the street. They're still remembering the connection between liberation, Libya, and also the Irish people. Now, this is the interjection that I want to make. I'm not on the term imperialism. I study education, and so not necessarily political theory or history, but I've noticed that the term is usually ill-used in terms of it's something being outdated. Whenever I bring it up, they say, oh, this is just some populist slogan said by third world leaders. It's not. It still exists today, and these great scintillating individuals have done it. So Michael Hudson, Kwame Nkrumah, and Vladimir Lenin. And it's not an expression of military prowess, and it's not about colonial onslaught, in my view. It's first and foremost a financial term to describe the means in which the relationship of dependency remains intact and unchallenged by all means necessary, including military. And so it is first and foremost economic term. And I'll explain why that's the first thing. So Libya, when it started to engage in this confrontations with the West, US bombed us in 1986, where more than 50 civilians died. Nobody talks about them, and this was all thanks, Reagan. And then there were the Lockerbie allegations that imposed harsh sanctions on Libya. That was very crippling, where import and export was banned and isolation. And the only people that stood with Libya were not the Arabs. It was the Pan-Africans. People, select countries in Africa that stood with us. And so that led to the African Union, and which is not a Libyan project. One has to acknowledge that it's an African project. And Kwame Nkrumah spoke about it, and people in the African Congress spoke about it for 100 years before this happened in 1999. It did just happen to be in Libya. There was a push for it by Gaddafi and some of the allies, but that was the situation. So some people like to glorify too much Libya's role. Yes, but it just started in Libya in 1999. Libya, after having a rapprochement with the West in 2003, all of its assets were unfrozen. It was able to engage in political diplomacy freely. And then you see Tony Blair, who's now Sir Tony Blair for the war crimes that he committed in Iraq. And also you see people like Anthony Giddens debating democracy, representative democracy versus direct democracy, with Gaddafi himself. So this was kind of the intellectual, even individuals from the London School of Economics were engaging with Libya. But Libya was not necessarily doing this. They were not buying French weapons, engaging with US economy. They just freed the assets so they can engage in a different world order, or what we right now we're listening to this new term, multipolarity, multiple poles in this world. And I give always this example, and I think the book by Maximilian Forte highlights this very well, Slouching Towards Sirte. That Sirte was a milestone of independence. So Libya wanted, for example, to build a railroad that connects all of the coasts of Africa, starting from Sirte as the Africa Gateway. And it wanted to build it not from British or French or American companies. They did it with Russian Railroad Company and China Railroad Construction Corporation. And that really angered the Americans when you had Vladimir Putin meeting Gaddafi and signing this deal, and they did not buy any weapons from the French, they bought with the Russians. So it was Libya investing in a different pole. They don't want the IMF World Bank, they're saying potentially something else, something beneficial for both of us. This was a leak from the US cable embassy, and they're saying the fact that an operator with Bechtel savvy and deep pockets was ultimately unable to secure his contract serves as a cautionary tale for the many US and Western companies seeking to enter Libya's booming market. This is what imperialism is. When you don't give them contracts, when you decide to choose who you want to engage with, they don't like it. So what happened in Libya in 2011, our assets, billions of dollars that were in foreign Western banks are all frozen. And they're frozen to our very day now. And they're being used, as Mahmoud Mamdani in the African Awakening book, as opposed to Arab Spring, again, realigning Libya with Africa. He said that all of the billions that Libya has in the United States, they're frozen and being used as interest-free loans. How many years since 2011? 11 years with interest-free loans. So this is more than $40 billion of frozen assets that are being used. And they're doing the same trick with what's happening today with Russia. So they have mastered the plan. They have tried it on us, right? And what happened in Libya is a horrific story. And we all know what happened to the black, dark-skinned Libyans. Libyans are Africans, and where most of us potentially look like me, but there's also a lot of black Libyans who are from Libya, and they were attacked and slaughtered in the streets, unfortunately. And that kind of, because they were framed like this. You have Libyan protesters who look like me, and then you have Gaddafi, who has no legitimacy. He had to import so-called mercenaries to fight off the protesters. And so when the protesters were attacking black Libyans, eventually what happened was they're saying, oh, he's importing mercenaries to kill black Libyans. And so now it's a fight between light-skinned Libyans like myself and then black-skinned Libyans, but they call them mercenaries. And so then comes the call of, oh, dear NATO, come save us. Right? And that was the intervention in 19th Security Council. And then also you had the Swedes coming who are not part of NATO. And you had the functionaries of imperialism, UAE and Qatar. And I say functionaries because they are functionaries. And this is Althusser's term. And their mandate also was violating a lot of things. They're supposed to be just providing no-fly zone. But they imported, the CIA imported the Green Islamic Fighting Group. Comrade Horace Campbell has this quote in his book, Global NATO. What the terrorists could not do in the 90s, they did with the help of NATO in 2011. And that's also the unipolarity, financed as warfare, where Hillary Clinton was emailing Sarkozy thanks to the work of Julian Assange. We know that they increased their influence by removing Gaddafi, so they could actually, Northern Africa becomes not only Europe's neighborhood, this actually becomes part of Europe almost. So the gradual destruction of Libya led to people like these. So the picture on the left is reminiscent of what happened also in 2014 in Ukraine, where we have McCain and Nancy Brown, I think that's the first name, taking pictures with radicals. And this is a person, Hakim Belhaj with McCain. And then you have the CIA asset in Libya, Khalifa Haftar. And he is the head of the Libyan National Army, the contradiction. He spent 20 years-ish in Langley, Virginia. So these are the heads, the influential figures. And I'll be wrapping up soon. So Libya is very interesting anything. And I apologize, I thought the space might be bigger screen. But what this timeline shows is that beginning of training of Libyan Coast Guard in 2015, and I'll explain why that's important. But the Libyan National Army is buying Russian equipment. It's not using American equipment. It shoots down AFRICOM plane in 2019. AFRICOM joined in 2006, and I was also tried to be recruited by the CIA. The big story. I said, no, don't worry. Yes. And then also the foreign push was trying to cancel national elections because of controversial figures. So the state of Essam, Gaddafi's son was running. They decided to cancel elections. And again, the National Army bombed the AFRICOM plane in 2022, a couple of months ago. So Libya, before, it used to defend its territory from all foreign influences. And this is what neocolonialism looks like right now. The outsourcing of defense of Europe to the Libyan Coast Guard. So right now, Libyan Coast Guard is not defending Libya from weapons, drugs, or whatever coming from Europe or Turkey particularly. They're actually defending Europe from migration, from drugs, and this is the outsourcing. And this is what also the strategy of the summit is, to consolidate these plans. And this is also the functionary of imperialism. This is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Libya, who graduated from George Mason University here, CIA space, yes, who is writing these things about Meloni of Italy being a progressive woman. And then she's writing this condolences to Her Majesty Queen, sense of responsibility and inspiration for us all, forgetting what she has done in Kenya. And then she's completely silent about the AFRICOM killing 11 civilians in Libya. Nothing is being said about that. I end with this, the issue of sovereignty. It's very important for us Africans. That's what we decide with our land, water, and airspace. And the story of Alex Saab, who was flying from South Africa to Iran, to Venezuela, and the AFRICOM stopped him and abducted him on African land, is something alarming for all of us. And I quote what Malcolm X said: "The revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence." Thank you.
Thank you so much for that powerful intervention. We will now move to Maurice, Carney, who is also joining us from online.
Please, if Maurice could,
Are you able to hear me? You can hear me, but you cannot see me. The host will have to enable my video. If that's not possible, I can go ahead and start with the audio low. Please
we
let me know.
can't, we can hear you, but we do
Okay.
not have a video.
Okay, the host has to enable my video, but that's fine. As long as you can hear me, I can go ahead and speak. Thank you very much to Professor Campbell and the rest of the team for inviting us to speak at this forum regarding the Congo in particular and the Great Lakes region of Africa, especially as it relates to U.S. Policy in the region, certainly over the past quarter century or so. As you know, the United States has different types of engagements, not only in Africa, but throughout the globe, where they use their soft power or their hard power in order to meet their strategic interests. And as it relates to the Congo, at least over the past 25 years or so, the United States has opted primarily for using its hard power, but through its proxies, its agents or its subcontractors. And two of the key agents of U.S. imperialism on the African continent, the president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, and president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, both of whom have kept the Congo and the region in a death trap for the past 25 years. With the backing of the United States as it relates to training of their militaries, provision of equipment, giving of financial resources, intelligence, they have waged a 25-year war of aggression and plunder against the Congolese people. They invaded Congo twice in 1996, and then again in 1998. Both those invasions led to what the United Nations says is the deadliest conflict in the world since World War II, where, according to the International Rescue Committee, estimated 6 million Congolese have perished as a result of the conflict and conflict-related causes. Half of those are children under the age of 5. In addition to the invasions, we see that both countries have occupied the Congo itself. They have fought each other on Congolese soil in the so-called Six-Day War in 2000, where the militaries of Rwanda and Uganda fought each other in the strategic city of Kisangani, killing 1,000 Congolese and injuring scores. And they're doing this all while they're, in the case of Rwanda, extracting coltan, illegally extracting coltan, a key ingredient for all of our cell phones and electronic devices. And they extract it and sell it to multinational corporations. In the case of Uganda, it's timber and gold. In fact, the scale and the scope of their plunder of the Congo as a middleman led the United Nations in a series of reports in 2001, 3 reports where they say they both Kagame and Museveni, the godfathers of the exploitation, the illegal exploitation of minerals in the Congo. We understand that that they serve as agents and they're not the end users because they transport those raw materials and ship those raw materials to Western corporations or to the Middle East. And what they've done really, if you look at how the state itself, the Congolese state, was designed, and for what purposes it was designed by Europeans in the late 1800s. It was designed strictly for extraction. At the time, of course, it was rubber and ivory. And this extractive process led to or resulted in an estimated 10 million Congolese that perished from 1885 to 1908. And that framework, that extractive framework has not fundamentally changed. What has been relatively new is that now you have Africans who are joining in that plunder. In fact, Museveni himself infamously stated that the Congo is a banana plantation. You go in and get what you want. So that framework of Congo being a outpost for extraction remains intact, and probably the crystal clear example of that is the estimated 90 million people that live in the Congo, its inhabitants. 70 million of those live on less than $2 a day. 70 million, according to the World Bank, live on less than $2 a day. Meanwhile, you have a gentleman by the name of Dan Gertler, an Israeli, who's become a billionaire because of his relationships with the Comprador class in Kinshasa. He has one mine, copper cobalt mine in the Katanga province, where he's netting, this is according to an article in Vanity Fair that was an expose that was published in May of this year. Dan Gertler is netting $20,000 an hour. So here it is that you have an estimated 70 million people living on $2 a day or less, and one individual who has access to mining concessions, making $20,000 an hour. And for those of you who'd like to learn more about that article was published in May of 2022, and it was entitled "Forget Gas Prices. The Billionaire Clubs Run on Cobalt Says Everything About Our Battery-Powered Future." And in this battery-powered future, Congo is central to that, in that the cobalt that is found in the Congo represents half of the reserves on the planet. And Congo itself produces more than 2/3 of the cobalt that is used to power our batteries, and that will ultimately be used to power the green revolution. If you add up all the or the renewable energy revolution, or green energy revolution, however it's the advocates characterize it, and if you add up all of the cobalt that's produced in the world, all the countries are producing cobalt, they don't equal to what the Congo itself produces. So we see Congo being strategic as it relates to resources that are vital to the functioning of modern industries, whether we're talking about the technology industry, as the case with coltan, we're talking about the electronics industry, we're talking about now the auto industry, and the move to establish electric cars as the common mode of transportation. California and the state of California itself, by 2035, they look to phase out all combustible engine and have only electric vehicles running in the state. So Congo looms large as it relates to major industries throughout the globe. And that puts what's unfolding there in the heart of the African continent front and center as it relates to geostrategic interests. Now, I shared with you how the Congo's neighbors, and in the case of particular Rwanda and Uganda, have engaged in the country in terms of destabilizing the country and for their personal interests, the individuals at the head of those states, and for their governments. And if we look at historically how the Congo has been viewed through a Pan-Africanist lens. Now, mind you, these leaders, Kagame and Museveni, they'll tell you that they're Pan-Africanists, and they are concerned about the continent as a whole. But if we look historically at how Pan-Africanists have engaged the Congo, especially looking at the 50s and 60s, we see that figures such as Kwame Nkrumah, Modibo Keita, Sekou Touré out of Guinea, they all sought to support the re-engineering and the redesigning of the Congo so that it's not solely an outpost for extraction, but rather an organized state where the people are the primary beneficiaries. And in that framework, they sought to support Lumumba's struggle for a free and liberated Congo. And in their idea, their conception, and their efforts to establish a United States of Africa, and Kwame Nkrumah lays this out, they saw in his book, The Challenge of the Congo, they saw Congo as being central to the industrialization of the African continent, to the development of the African continent, to the advancement of the African continent. They saw Congo as being central to the Pan-African project of the United States of Africa. And in The Challenge of the Congo, Nkrumah laid out how he had an agreement with Lumumba where Congo would serve as the capital of the United States of Africa. So we see a clear distinction between how the Pan-Africanists that we hold in high esteem and seek to emulate, how they view the Congo, how they engage the Congo, as opposed to today's would-be Pan-Africanists, so-called Pan-Africanists. In fact, Touré himself sent André Blouin, who worked with him, Pan-Africanist sister from the Central African Republic, who worked with, organized in Guinea to reject de Gaulle's referendum, where Guinea said no to being a part of remaining a part of France. She was a key organizer in that effort. Sent her to Congo to work with Lumumba. Félix Moumé out of the Cameroon was also dispatched. So we saw how Pan-Africanists of yesteryears sought to support Africa or Congo and its development into the United States of Africa. So today, with Museveni and Kagame, what they've done, for all intents and purposes, is to join the colonizing class in the plunder of the Congo. They're seen really as the key agents of neocolonialism on the African continent. And chief among them is certainly Paul Kagame, who is in the news for recently resuscitating the so-called M23, which is basically a proxy militia for the Rwandan government. And they were defeated over a decade ago in 2012, 2013, by a Pan-African force led by South Africa, Tanzania, and Malawi, who functioned as intervention brigade on the part of the United Nations, beat back the M23. And that's part of a pattern that we've seen over the past quarter century, in that when ever Rwanda and Uganda step up their aggression against the Congo, the recourse has been to the Southern African Development Community. We saw that in 1998 when Rwanda and Uganda invaded for the second time. Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe all rallied at the request of then President Laurent Desire Kabila to beat back these neo-colonial forces that were trying to exercise undue influence over the Congo. We see today where Kagame has stepped up his war of aggression and plunder against the Congolese people. Although the president, Tshisekedi, has responded vociferously in terms of his rhetoric, he may have made a strategic mistake in that he has sought refuge not in the Southern African Development Community. He sought succor not out of the South, but rather in the East African Community, the EAC. And which is rather perplexing, because two of the key aggressor nations against the Congo, Rwanda and Uganda, make up the EAC. And Tshisekedi has relied on Kenya in particular, where Kenya has deployed forces to Goma, the main city in the east, to defend that city of 2 million inhabitants, which was occupied and taken over by the M23 in 2012. And former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, has been throughout the Congo and Kinshasa and to Goma to meet with leaders, meet with the people, and has been designated as a special envoy for the East African community to help in trying to bring about a resolution to the latest destabilizing effort on the part of the M23. And East Africa has, as one of our speakers has mentioned before, major economic interests in the Congo, especially Congo being serving as an outlet for natural resources coming out of the Congo to the east. They have their banks that have been recently set up in Kinshasa. And Kagame has been, Felix Tshisekedi, the president of Congo, has been close with Kenyan leaders. But we don't see that being a viable option for bringing about the kind of stability that both Tshisekedi and his collaborators in East Africa are looking for. What we've seen is that they may be reluctant to move on Kagame and even Museveni himself, because they're part of that East African community. And the obstacles are also playing on the international level at where they have been for the past 25 years or so, where the crimes that have been committed in the Congo by Paul Kagame and Yoweri Museveni have received diplomatic and political cover from the West, from the United States, from France, from Belgium. In fact, the Catholic Church in the Congo organized nationwide demonstrations this past week. And one of the declarations that came out from the church was quite striking, in that they called out the West not only for its duplicity in the way it is dealt with Rwanda and Rwanda's aggression against the Congo, but also its complicity. And they named the United States in particular. They named France. They named Belgium. They named these countries that have covered for Paul Kagame and for Yoweri Museveni. And in fact, that cover has resulted in the tremendous suffering of the Congolese people. And Kagame himself has played that role, that subcontractor role to the hilt. We see one of the leading voices today calling for a dialogue while between the Congolese and the Rwandans is Emmanuel Macron of France, President of France. At the G20 meeting in Indonesia a couple weeks ago, he called on, he refused to say that Rwanda was responsible for the M23 uprisings in the East and fueling of conflict in the East, and just call for a dialogue. And you can understand why France would do that, because Kagame is not only of the service of the United States, but also France. So we see in Mozambique, where Rwandan troops had gone in to confront so-called terrorists there in Cabo Delgado. However, if you look closely, you see that they were there primarily to protect the French company Total and Total's interests, oil and gas interests in Mozambique. So Kagame serves the interests, the strategic interests of a coterie of Western nations. That was the case of France. And even in the midst of this aggression on the part of the M23 backed by Rwanda, we see that the European Union just disbursed some $20 million to the Rwandan government for its activities in Mozambique, which drew the ire of Congo's Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Denis Mukwege. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for repairing women who've been victims of the wars that Rwanda and Uganda have led against the Congo.
Sorry,
my time may be running short.
It
Yeah, so let me just wrap up and say that what a key challenge for us, or here in the U.S. and in the West, is one, to confront the narrative that comes out of the Entebbe Agreement from 1998, Bill Clinton, where they presented Kagame, Museveni as Renaissance leaders, new Pan-Africanists. We need to cut through the propaganda and present a different narrative, the narrative of plunder, a narrative of wars or aggression, a narrative of agents of neocolonialism that has not only destabilized the Congo and set Congo back, but as long as Congo is destabilized and not self-determined, it will be setting Africa back. So that's one of the big challenges that we have in order to confront these agents of neocolonialism with a different narrative in educating the masses about what's truly unfolding in the Congo and the geostrategic interests that are at play.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Netfa Freeman from the Black Alliance.
Thank you. I hope it's all right that I thank you. Good morning. First, on behalf of the Black Alliance, for Peace, we would like to thank the Global Pan-African Movement and the Howard University Center for African Studies for this humble honor to address the people present here today. As was said, my name is Netfa Freeman. I'm an organizer in PACA, which stands for Pan-African Community Action. And PACA is a member organization of the Black Alliance for Peace. And I think this is an important starting point because of the work that the Black Alliance between the Black Alliance for Peace and its member organizations, there are several, not just PACA. A lot of them focused on localized domestic repression of Africans in the U.S. And many of them, and then Black Alliance for Peace, or PAP, pans out and makes the national and international connection. And it's inspiring that the conveners of today's Global Pan-African People's Intervention on the U.S.-African, I'm gonna say it, Comprador Summit, have political insight, ideological clarity to recognize that central to resisting imperialism in Africa is AFRICOM, U.S. Africa Command, and how this reflects the repression of the non-white working class within the borders through things like the 1033 program, 1033 and 1122 program, that militarized domestic police. Now, the Black Alliance for Peace sees the U.S. Africa Comprador Summit taking place here as a collusion between the United States and the world's leading colonial power, the world's leading colonial power, and the African leaders who serve as their junior partners in Asia. They're coming together to advance and maintain U.S. dominance over Africa. U.S. civil society, claiming to act in the best interest of Africa, has a long list of things they think should be addressed at the summit. Like the Summit of the Americas held earlier this year, they attacked Eritrea and Zimbabwe, who they did not invite, and pretend that the U.S. has honorable, hopeful plans for Africa. They do all of this to hide the real U.S. role in Africa and give legitimacy to the U.S. interests they've come to serve. On the heels of Human Rights Day, which is held every December 10th, Day Human Rights Day, they convene to undermine the human rights of African people while ignoring the historical record of the U.S. in Africa and the geostrategic interest it is committed to upholding. The proceedings, side events, invitations, and public relations campaigns are designed to secure greater control of Africa's abundant resources for U.S. national interests and the interests of international finance capital. The U.S. claims that this summit will, quote, demonstrate the United States' enduring commitment to Africa and will underscore the importance of U.S.-Africa relations and increased cooperation on shared global priorities, end quote. The Black Alliance for Peace steps forward to expose such statements as disingenuous lies meant to cover up the United States' malicious intentions. Historically, the United States historically, the United States was and is the primary beneficiary of the genocidal capture, transshipment, and enslavement of African people, which is responsible for the presence of Black people in the United States today. At every turn, the USA has attacked, vilified, and tried to destroy every effort to free African people from various forms of oppression and exploitation. The U.S. worked hand in hand with the white supremacist European colonization of Africa, and when the people's resistance became too much for Europe to control, the U.S. took over as the new colonial masters by establishing the neo-colonial, neoliberal strategy that they come here to strengthen. Since the end of World War II, both the Democrats and Republicans have engaged in a vicious process of destabilizing African liberation movements and undermining African sovereignty. Democratically elected leaders such as Patrice Lumumba of the Congo were assassinated by the CIA. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana was overthrown in a CIA-orchestrated coup. These are only two of many who fell victim to U.S. government meddling. The U.S. waged a proxy war in the Congo with the assistance, we just heard Brother Maurice talk about, proxy war in the Congo with the assistance of Uganda and Rwanda. And in Somalia and Ethiopia from 2006 to 2009, followed by sustained drone attacks of Somalia under the guise of fighting extremists. The U.S.-led NATO war demolished Libya, murdered Muammar Gaddafi, and killed thousands of Libyan citizens who they claimed to be protecting. The need to understand and make the connection between what happens in Africa and what happens to Black people in the United States is paramount. The same forces that killed Gaddafi also killed Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Fred Hampton. The same U.S. intelligence agencies that overthrew the governments in Africa destroyed civil rights organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and Black Power organizations like the Black Panther Party. When we see these links, we can see the U.S. African Leaders Summit is about U.S. domination of Black and African people everywhere. Today, the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, partners with 53 of the 54 countries on the continent of Africa, for the sole purpose of robbing Africa of its resources and exploiting the labor of the African masses. In one form or another, hegemony of Africa has been the policy of the USA for centuries, and there is no reason to believe that these policies and practices will change as a result of this farcical U.S. African Leaders Summit. One clear goal of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit is to challenge the inroads of the People's Republic of China and to a lesser extent the Russian Federation have made what they've made on the continent. the Democrat, Republican parties, and their corporate bosses want to halt their regional cooperation initiated in the Horn of Africa since 2018. They want to undermine anti-France and pro-Russian expressions among the people in countries like Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso, which are also invoking the legacy of revolutionaries like Modibo Keita, Sekou Touré, and Thomas Sankara. The Black Alliance for Peace wants to draw particular attention to the complicity of the mostly Democratic Party Congressional Black Caucus members over the role of the U.S. federal government in Africa. These people who claim to represent the interests of Black people in the USA and the U.S. sit quiet and in action, in active dereliction of their purpose to safeguard the rights and interests of Black and oppressed people. The Congressional Black Caucus are in cahoots with the African leaders who serve as the face of capitalism in the U.S. and imperialism in Africa. They are looking for cover in the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. Over the next week, they will wine and dine African leaders, make speeches, convene events, and make backdoor, under-the-table deals for the U.S. neocolonial, white supremacist, patriarchal order. This summit is an insult to the people of African descent inside and outside of Africa and must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. In contrast, the Black Alliance for Peace is holding an anti-imperialist week of action. We have a table out there where there's information about it and other positions. We also have a statement that we devised about the summit, and it's out on the table. The week of action is to raise awareness about related to the real issues that must be addressed about U.S.-Africa relations. We do not seek a place at the table and believe that the table should be turned over. The Black Alliance for Peace calls for the dismantling of NATO, AFRICOM, and all imperialist structures. Africa and the rest of the world cannot be free until all peoples are able to realize the right of sovereignty and the right to live free of domination. We call all progressive and peace-loving people to join us in an uncompromising anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-white supremacist, and anti-patriarchal movement for change. This is our urgent plea. If not us, who? If not now, when? The Black Alliance for Peace demands are the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from Africa, the closure of U.S. bases throughout the world, and the Congressional Black Caucus to oppose the U.S. Africa Command and conduct hearings on AFRICOM's impact on the African continent with the full participation of members of U.S. and African civil society. We ask that you join us this anti-imperialist week of action. Thank you. No compromise, no retreat. Black Alliance for Peace.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists for these powerful interventions. At this point, we would like to open it up for discussion, questions, comments from the audience. We have a second mic for
Good morning, everybody, comrades in arms. My name is Tiffany Wheatland. I'm a student at Howard University in the Department of History. I can't even say thank you, just we're grateful for the presentation, for the intervention. Many of you have spoken deeply to the intersections of U.S. imperialism and the continued plunder of the continent. And I suppose my question is really focused on response, particularly around the issue of, for example, strategic placement of Libya, the strategic significance of Congo and its resources. What are the pressure points as you each can see it in terms of maybe not so much pressuring our government, US government, but in terms of resisting continued intrusion of multi-colonial, neocolonial, but in particular multinational interests of corporations on the continent. So, and I suppose what I'm getting at is, given the enduring nature of imperialism, how do you see recharting a path of autonomy that allows for sovereignty in terms of control over strategic resources and over relationships that we form with countries around the world.
We'll take a couple.
So, personally, in the context of Libya, one of the slides I took the CIA reporting what BJ Rashad in his book called America's Libyans. That means the comprador class is it has too many connections with foreign capital. That's its allegiance. And so when people speak of nationalism in the third world, unfortunately, it has no meaning anymore for these comprador class because they're tied to capital. That's what their allegiance is. In terms of strategic alliances, what Gramsci calls, I think it's difficult in the case, especially of Libya, because you have, on the one hand, the CIA controlling Haftar, and then you have also the Muslim Brotherhood being controlled by Turkey. And so Turkey is also a function of US as well. And so the question that I kind of always ask myself, who would be aligning for the sovereignty of Libya? It's none of those kind of global north countries or their functionaries. And Turkey, again, is part of NATO. I think it has to do something with Libyans having dialogue with themselves. And this is what the United Nations mission is preventing, unfortunately, from Libyans having dialogue with themselves. They fly them to Geneva, they fly them to Sweden, and they have these fancy dinners and like the summit right now. And they're selecting the elite to dictate the future of Libya. We have to push a de-link, as Samir Amin calls it, de-link from this kind of global hegemony and construct something of our own. And this can only happen from the grassroots. I don't think any foreign nation has the capability of doing that. And lastly, recently the United Nations sent a new mission to Libya. And this person is, I think, I might be wrong, his name is Bakele, but he might, I think, from Cote d'Ivoire. Then the reaction from the Libyan, Senegal? Oh yeah, thank you so much. And the reaction from Libyans was, what is this African person gonna help us with? As opposed to Stephanie Williams, who was suppressing the Bahraini people when she was an ambassador to US and Bahrain. She was saying they were all listening to her. So this has to do also with internal racism that Libyans have towards Black people, and they don't see anything stemming from the African community, unfortunately. So again, it has to be something national coming from Libya, and obviously,
I think that line with what I was thinking. I think I appreciate the question. Pretty kind of complex, but it's a very important question. And I think one of the things that the history teaches us, I remember Malcolm X quote about history disqualified war officers. Look at where the enemy becomes most uncomfortable is when our people, our leaders in the organizations, establishing internationalism. Look at the organization of American Unity. Look what happened to different things. That's when they become most uncomfortable. Even a lot of times we focus on leaders, but actually the leaders, the things that they do that speak to internationalism is when they go after them. But at the same time, like Brother was saying, I think there's also something to be said that we have to remember that all politics is local. That means that the power is exercised in terms of people being able to organize on local level. And you use a very important term, power, control of our resources, things like that. Even for in the US, Pan-African Community Action, we see ourselves as organizing grassroots-based, community-based power on the local level in Washington, D.C. But we're Pan-Africanists, which means we also know we got to forge connections with the people around the world, right? I think it's important also for us to, so there has to be a rigorous program of not only political education of our masses, but that of building local power that and dual power projects to contend with the imperialist capitalists or even domestic, contend it and discredit it. This is what has to happen, and that that was a start, and then the trend. So we have to do that, and then we have to build turn people's assemblies, all that, and then transcontinental projects that pose, and even on the that even, it's complicated in the sense that they do so much to obscure the nature of the real enemies. You find people taking up dictators, get this dictator out or that dictator out, but then, the dictator can be removed and then there would be replaced and the system remains intact. But still, it's dependent on, like Brother said, they depend on the ground not being able to communicate and establish ourselves as being on. We must be organized. I guess that's basically what I'm saying. Gotta be organized. Gotta be organized on the most fundamental level. We take control of our resources, and then we have to build that organization into a transcontinental massive. It is explicitly. Oh, this is the part that and I'll say this and this. This might seem like maybe semantics stuff are small, but I think we have to, in terms of a psychological and ideological sense, get rid of Americanism. We are not Americans. We are colonized by settler colonialism. And once we understand that, it's even easier, not just understanding just us, but we have to build that understanding amongst our masses, that the same interests and the same, what AFRICOM is doing is how they see us in the United States. What they do to us in the United States with the militarization of the police and all that is how they see Africa. That's why they do it that way. And so the only difference between us and Africans born on the continent is that some had the land stolen from them and the rest of us were stolen from the land. But we are African people, and that central idea has to be gotten across, not just among those of us who are intellectuals and kind of, but it has to be enforced and ingrained into the people that organize grassroots, working class, mass level. And it also will help, people on the continent. That idea will just help us all.
I don't know if any of the speakers online have any responses as well to this question.
Yes, just quickly, this is Maurice. A few points. What can show what Friends of the Congo has been doing. I think political education, popular education is key. And to the extent that the sister who asked the questions, those in the audience, those online, can support that effort, we'd encourage them to do so by visiting us at friendsofthecongo.org. Where they can be educated about what's happening in the Congo and the Great Lakes region of Africa, and also be a part of organizing effort. Consistent engagement is vital to our bringing about change and support to progressive forces on the ground. And there are a tremendous amount of organized forces that are in rural Congo and even in the cities. So they can benefit from our support, from our financial support, from our material support, from our intellectual support, are being connected with them. And again, I encourage you to visit our website to be a part of that effort. And we have to put pressure on the US government, US foreign policy. We're in the process now of, again, mobilizing faith leaders, students, grassroots activists to lend their voice to putting pressure on members of the Congressional Black Caucus and members of Congress of the Progressive Caucus and the Congress overall. I think that's really key. It's not outdated. When our faith leaders and the students stand up and say they want to see a change in U.S. foreign policy, we've seen it make a difference in the past. So I think we cannot leave that stone unturned. And finally, the engagement. We need to engage and support our alternative media, because it's through the alternative media that we're able to educate our local communities. Because the corporate media is fully in bed with the empire. So supporting our alternative media and assisting us in getting access to the alternative media, Pacifica Network and the host of other networks that are out there. I think that's vital for our organizing effort. We had just yesterday, on Thursday, there's an attorney in Washington by the name of Terry Collingsworth who's brought a lawsuit against the major corporations, tech companies, and the auto companies, Tesla and Microsoft and Apple, for their complicity in child labor in the Congo. So that's an example of an individual taking an attorney, taking matters into his own hands and bringing suit against major companies in the U.S. For their role in resource exploitation in the Congo in particular. So there are an array of tactics that are available and strategies that are available at our disposal that we can, we can utilize. Then again, I encourage people to go to our website, sign up for the email list, and they can be a part of this effort to bring pressure to bear on U.S. foreign policy, and at the same time support those organized forces that are in the Congo throughout the country, who are doing incredible work to try and bring about change in the heart of the continent.
Thank you. We have one more question, two more questions before we go for break. So I'll collect these two questions and then give the speakers time to make just some final comments.
Okay, just a quick amen. Yes, we are African people. We are African people. We are African. We are African. We are African. People need to get that in their heads. It's very important, because I hear folks talk about we, like Biden and us is the same. That ain't the case. Netfa, you said that AFRICOM has partnerships with 53 of the 54 states. Can you give us some brief explanation of what kind of partnerships they have with different states, and what is the effect of AFRICOM operations for that?
Thank you very much. My question is this. You talk about some of the fake Pan-African, and back in the day, when Pan-Africans were voting for socialism, every neo-colonialist claimed to be a socialist. When the imperialists began to go after someone and begin to assassinate them, first they assassinate their character and they humanize them. Should we as a movement begin to target certain fake puppets like Kagame, really go after, put pressure, hard pressure on that part of tactical push?
I'm going to read a few questions from the online audience as well, and then the panelists can select which they want to answer. The first question we have from Willy asks, so are you saying that for non-self-governing peoples still struggling for self-determination, that the machinery of state apparatus is no longer necessary or important? Question. Dr. Jill Humphreys asks, can any of the panelists offer concrete approaches to impacting the U.S. Africa policy, either through establishing or using subcommittees in the model of the Free South Africa movement, in addition to protests? For example, the role of Rwanda or Uganda. She also asks, how can existing civil society organizations in the U.S., Black community, African American community, be leveraged to engage in U.S. Africa policy and for political education? And then Mark Willy asks, how are U.S. relations with Russia and China used as a basis and or guiding force for how the U.S. government engages African nations?
Take any angle on any of these questions. Maybe we should let Comrade Willy respond if you have any points. Oh, he's, okay, so.
You one that you read that I want to find, but I could, but at first with the AFRICOM one. It was basically half, so I want to do that one brief, but there's a lot to it. So the 54 out of so there's military bases on the African continent, direct U.S. military bases, about 26 or 29 of them. But then there also what they refer to as lily pad bases, and that's basically and then there's military relations, special operations forces that don't necessarily have to do with the base, but the lily pad bases are basically are almost like is the access to African military bases, U.S. using other military bases that are on top. And basically, and the other part of your question, and then there's just all of these operations that they're claiming fighting terrorist extremism and terrorism and violence and whatnot, which is a problem, but we never deal with what the presence of, and this gets to the second part of your question, is that it gives the appearance that the people who are causing the forces that are responsible for this problem on the continent are also the solution for it. That's what AFRICOM does. The other thing that is, and more directly to what people may have noticed, talked about, that there's in the last couple of years, a series of coups d'etat that happened. And I've said, in response to this, and it's a very complicated issue, so I don't want to oversimplify what's happening with all of them. But one thing I think we should suggest that what AFRICOM has done, because you also have popular, unpopular leaders as a result of them just not, serving the interests of the people. They're unpopular. AFRICOM comes and trains people. They do all this kind of training. They're not giving them they're not providing emancipatory ideology or anything. Giving them Western indoctrination, right? But sometimes it doesn't hold up. But what it does do is create an emboldened military class that says, why should I, follow this comprador? We can take over, right? And they can even have the guys with the popular support of the people because the people wanted the person out. So it makes this complicated situation where it obscures the real dynamics of neocolonialism and all of that. You can see where France, there's a lot of anti-French sentiment in a lot of these other ways where they pick out France, but they don't have necessarily the same regard for the United States and Africa. So that's the answer to your question. I gave some to that. I didn't put up this a lot, so I don't want to be too. And there was some questions. I think, Brother Neil, your question seemed like it may be more for Maurice. So, anybody? But there was something that you read that I wanted to, I can't remember now. But it was one about Africans doing something around that put people here, being able to change it.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah,
Well, there was one
one.
that, but then also in terms of the model of the Free South Africa movement. So
Oh, no, I remember that. It was somebody asking if I was no state.
Oh, yeah.
Because I want to act, I want to say something. It wasn't.
Sure. So, so Sipiwe was asking, are you saying, I guess in one of the presentations he's asking, are you saying that for non-self-governing people still struggling for self-determination, that the machinery of state apparatus is no longer necessary or important?
I kind of assumed that for me, it seemed like it may have been. And so this is so complicated. So the organization of people, political and economic organization of people is the state by default. Anarchists, they don't believe in the state structure and whatnot. But the state, as it currently comes on in Africa, by and large, holding in the grips of a global order, economic, financial order, financial institutions, and all of that. So while we definitely need to be organized in a way that would end up inevitably constitute a state, but the states as they're currently configured, and at least the people serving the interests, they're using the state apparatus for something else. And that has to be completely overthrown and revamped and see anything wherever they had revolutions, they even redid their constitution. You know, if we're gonna deliberate ourselves from imperialism and capitalism, then we have to establish something that's so separate, so remotely so disengaged from imperialism. It has to be socialist. It has to be about the redistribution of wealth. It has to be the nationalization of all the major things. It has to be universal health care, education, all of that imperialism will not allow, right? They won't, we have to constitute something completely different. And when we do it, it will be what's tantamount to a state. So I'm not saying, I can't say that there's no reason for a state. But at the same time, we have to delegitimize it and understand that what's in place is not going to serve us. It not be transformed.
Just quickly in response to both Mark and Neil. With Mark, the U.S. response to Russia has been to introduce HR 7311 in the U.S. House of Representatives, countering malign Russian activities in Africa Act. That bill has been one of the U.S.'s response in order to try and curb Russian influence on the African continent, whether it's through address the Wagner Group, Russians' presence in the Central African Republic. The U.S. is pushing that bill in the Congress as an effort. And really, AFRICOM, in a lot of respects, is an attempt to do in Africa, to confront China in Africa, where China, both the government and its corporations, are making great strides economically, in terms of mineral for infrastructure swaps, low interest debts, you name it. And neither United States or Europe can compete with that. However, the equalizer for the U.S. is Africa Command. We saw during the Obama administration where the U.S. military presence on the African continent increased some 2,000% or so, where although AFRICOM was developed coming out of the Heritage Foundation and its theoretical framework, and then picked up by Donald Rumsfeld and George Bush in 2008, inaugurated, it was the Democratic administration that put it on turbo. So I'd say those two over the past decade or so gives you a sense of how the U.S. is responding to Russia and China on the African continent. And to Neil, I think a key piece that we have to understand, and I don't want to make Congo all about Rwanda and Uganda, because there's so many more challenges that the Congo faces. Key among them is just this organizational deficiency, especially at the state level, and its inability to really exercise full authority over the country itself. And I have to remind folks, this is a state that was bequeathed to the Congolese. The Congolese didn't develop the Congo; they didn't develop it as a state. It was designed for a particular purpose that it continues to serve to this day. But as it relates to Rwanda and Uganda, and Rwanda in particular, propaganda is a major instrument that Paul Kagame has used, and he's done it strategically. He's ensconced himself in the Francophonie, which is the French counterpart to the Commonwealth. He's also ensconced himself in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth meeting in 2022 was held in Rwanda. His former foreign minister, Kagame, that is, Louise Mushikiwabo, is the president of the Francophonie. So in being in these two institutions, he's put his estate at disposal to the West. So you'll find him being in Jamaica, and we applauded Professor Campbell for challenging, getting on Jamaican radio and educating the Jamaican public about who Paul Kagame really is. He's not a friend of Africans and not a friend of Jamaicans, and that he's responsible for murder and crimes in the Congo. And we see he was recently lauded by Mia Motley of Barbados. So for us, strategically, it's so vital that you assist us, you work with Friends of the Congo and other Congolese progressive forces to be in these spaces, to be on Jamaican radio, to be on in radio in Barbados. We were just talking with media leaders in Belize, because Kagame was supposed to go to Belize earlier this year. So those avenues that are available to us, at our disposal, we encourage you to bring those to the table as we organize a popular resistance to this agent of empire. And it's not just a personalized Kagame, but he represents a particular type. And we have to demystify and deconstruct that type. The Blaise Compaorés, the Alassane Ouattaras, those who are really carrying water for France and Belgium and the United States and the UK. So that's a part of the work that we have to put in our popular education, in demystifying, deconstructing the role that these agents are playing, really, in holding back and retarding our Pan-African push, the fulfillment of the Pan-African project that the likes of Nkrumah and Lumumba and Touré and Keita carried out or laid out in the 50s and 60s. So I really can't overstate the importance of our putting in the hard work in being on those radios and being in those schools. And for you, those of you who have access to universities, to faith leaders, to media outlets, for you to bring those resources to the table and provide an avenue or platform for Congolese who are on the ground, or other Africans, to speak to the African world and share with you what the organizing they're doing on the ground, the challenges they face, how you can support them, and how you can be a part of the Pan-African project that is still very much alive, particularly among the youth, not only in the Congo, but throughout the region. We work with Ugandans, Rwandans, a host of other young Africans who are fully embraced Pan-Africanism and recognize the destructive role that some of these agents have played, and want to carry on the tradition of the Lumumbas and the Nkrumahs and the Tourés. So that's what I would encourage. And again, I'll go to friendsofthecongo.org, sign up on our email list, and be a part of this this movement that's unfolding in the heart of the African continent.
The first question, I think that it was related to how can we criticize these so-called Pan-Africanists, right? They are self-proclaimed Pan-Africanists, obviously. They're, by all definitions, by all textbooks, they're not. I think there's a fine line of what's one thing that we can learn from what's happening in Iran today and for the past 3 months is that there is this whole global push for, we need to stop the Iranian regime from oppressing women. And this is 100% correct statement. But it also comes with malign intent when you have the Zionists writing that way. You have Americans writing that way. They're saying, do it by all means necessary. Again, to change the regime too. And in order to change the regime, they create something alternative, which would be aligning with the new pole, something like pro-US, pro-West. So I think for us, as we strive to criticize, be it Kagame or Uganda and so forth, I think the goal is to also advocate for an alternative, that our voices should not be usurped by future imperialists, future neoliberals who are going to keep reproducing the same thing. And I think Noam Chomsky has highlighted this very well about the political economy and human rights. The human rights violations committed by Kagame, nobody cares about apparently right now. But if some socialist leader does them against the comprador class for espionage and treason and so forth, it becomes a big issue, and they impose sanctions on that country. So I think we have to say no to these so-called Pan-Africanists, but at the same time say what is our projected goal, right, behind this. And then the second thing, which is very rough question of the national question, I think this is also a balanced book, but the national question
in terms of its relation to minorities and those who are striving for self-determination. Almost, you have the Benedict Anderson, the postmodernists, who say the nation state should not exist. It's an imagined community, and we should remove all borders. But then that is also a leeway for neoliberalism, leeway for this U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, where they're inviting, oh yeah, military cooperation, economic cooperation, and so forth, that there's an obliteration of the national decision making. I think the state's reform through a revolutionary means, as opposed to its obliteration, is one thing. So I can use the example of Western Sahara in Morocco. What's happening there, that is a nation state colonizing people, but they're not providing them, as brother Netfa just said, with any socialist, projects, anything like that, where there's an equal redistribution of resources for the minoritized and oppressed Western Saharan people, right? What's happening is that the nation state is continuing using its means and its apparatuses to continue to oppress the people, and then also normalizing relations with the Zionists. Right. So the issue then becomes is that the nation state is being reactionary and in service of imperialism. So I think reforming the intents of the nation state is better than saying the nation state should be obliterated, because I think it's the existing entity, despite the fact that there was a construction by colonialism and the Berlin Conference and so forth. But I think that's the means of actually maintaining and reforming things for those former. It's contested answer, but
Please join me in thanking all of our presenters for this panel. We will take just a couple minutes break because we're running a little bit behind time. So stretch your legs, please get some snacks outside, and in 5 minutes we will come back. Our second panel today is food, health, and climate. Thank you.